Welcome back to Siaran Khas Prn Sabah, Hari Pengundian Sabah votes. Today I am Jessie CHAHAL with GERARD RATNAM, and today of course Sabah stands at a decisive crossroad. After almost 2 weeks of intense campaigning, the 17th state election now comes down to this very moment. The decision will be made today. 1.74 million voters across 882 polling centres have begun casting their ballots as early as 7:30 this morning, choosing who will take the state forward. Polling will close in stages across the vast state, beginning at noon and ending by 5:30 p.m. today.
And like they're saying, the stakes couldn't be higher. Sabah is electing 73 state representatives, with 37 seats needed to form the government. That's the simple majority. Now, under Undi 18 and AVR, that's the acronym for Automatic Voter Registration, young voters now make up more than half the electorate at this point. This positions them as potential kingmakers in this race, and that's what we want to try to find out, or as we say in Bahasa Melayu, kupas lah. Okay, that's going to be happening shortly with our in-studio guests. This is also one of Malaysia's most crowded elections, 596 candidates, including 73 independents, with the Tulit constituency seeing a 14-cornered fight.
That's a record.
Yeah. Can you even wrap your head around the concept of a 14-cornered fight?
I can't, but it just shows you the spirit and, of course, the interest.
Last time I saw something like that was in Tamyang's Rembat. But having said that, the Election Commission expects early results around 10 p.m. with full outcomes targeted by midnight. Weather permitting, of course.
That's right. And what we're aiming to do here is to take you with us on that journey as we look to who are the candidates, who are the parties, and what are the bread and butter issues for the people of Sabah. We'll be speaking to experts and guests, as well as right now to our colleague journalist, Syed Elia, who's on the ground, giving us a bit of an update as to what the situation is right there. So over to you, Elias.
Right. So, Syed, if you can hear us, what is the voter turnout looking like so far at the polling stations across Sabah? Syed?
All right. Hi. Thank you, Jessie, as well as Gerard. So far this morning, voter turnout across Sabah has been steady, with a gradual increase towards midday, and urban areas such as Api-Api, Likas, Inanam saw voters signing up early as 6 o'clock in the morning, with many arriving before polling stations open. And in the interior areas like Labawan, Suk, and the Penjangan, turnout started slower due to the rainy weather and slippery roads and access challenges in those areas. And I'm currently at the Sekolah Kebangsaan Koko, which is in the Inanam area. For example, in here, we arrived around 6 o'clock in the morning, and we saw there's many young voters has already lined up since 6:30 a.m. where the polling station opened at 7:30. It takes about 1 hour. When I asked them, why do you come early? They said they want to finish it fast so they can do other businesses in the midday session. And apart from that, when we went towards the SK Koko, we were in the high ground area, there was also a minor landslide along the main road, which also causes traffic for people who are beneath the landslide area to go to SK Koko to vote. But overall, the turnout is expected to peak between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. as many voters make their way to the station. And now, currently, the weather is shiny, and it allows more voters to come in. We're hoping for that.
Right. With what's happening there, you're on the ground, you're speaking to young people, and if we look at the numbers, the young people or the younger demographics make up the bulk of this elections. What are they telling you? When you speak to young people, are they excited? Is the tension and the excitement palpable at this point?
Yes. Actually, if you could see, it's true. Half of the voters is considered as the young voters, and as we do understand, in the previous election, the state election in 2020, the Undi 18 was not been used during that period. So most of them between 18 years old and 29 years old, if I'm not mistaken, they are considered as new voters who will start to vote in the state election, and most of them actually have a lot of queries, because one among that, when we asked the young voters, is that how do you see about the politics in Sabah? They was quite surprised where there's a lot of candidates in one area. For example, we took Tulit. Tulit has about 14 corner seats, where when we went there last 2 days, most of the young voters had query whether who to vote. And this will be the first time they vote. And when I asked them again, how was the voting process, they saw the lineup of candidates in the sheet is quite long. And maybe they also asked who should they vote, because most of the parties had given out their manifesto, which allows for them to have pembangunan infrastruktur di sana, and then they also asked for what would be the job opportunities would they have, especially at the pendalaman area. So considered this, there are two types of young voters that we saw. The first one will be the urban areas. Urban areas want more of job opportunities, want more of infrastructure, whereas in the rural areas, they wanted more towards how do they can adjust for the three most important things, which is electricity, water, as well as the roads.
Right, Syed, thanks for highlighting some of those, not just bread and butter issues, but as you've mentioned as well, the aspiration of the people of Sabah as to what they hope the next leadership will bring. And just to recap, the Undi 18 is in full force, and the youth vote is at 54%. That is the core block. That's close to 1 million people voting in that category.
We hope to join Syed. Syed usually does some amazing FB, live FB stuff, and we hope to hear from him later on. When you log on to FB, at least he'll be around Sabah speaking to people, and that's going to be very interesting.
It is a weekend, and we can understand that you are probably out and about. So take us with you on Facebook and on our social media platforms as well. If you'd like to get more information by the minute and those updates, you can of course visit prn.bernama.com as well.
Which brings us to our guest in the studio, LIYANA Marzuki. Great to have you in the studios. Thank you very much for taking time off to be with us. You spent years inside the system, from the Attorney General's chambers to MITI, seeing firsthand how decisions are made and how policies roll out on the ground. And now you're on the other side of the equation, analysing governance, democracy, public accountability. A lot of work for you and a lot of pushback, I think.
Yeah, of course.
All the things Malaysians are talking about at this point. Let's just get into the thick of it. This election sees a large number of parties and even independent candidates. They're all entering the race. It makes this one of Sabah's most crowded contests in recent years. Does this high number of contestants reflect a healthy democracy or dangerous political fragmentation? Of course, I don't understand what it means when you say a healthy democracy, because it's kind of diluted already. But let's just hear from you.
Thank you, Gerard. Thank you, Jessy. Thank you, Bernama TV. This is my first English interview ever. I always write in Bahasa Malaysia, and my talking gig is always in Bahasa Malaysia. So thank you. I'm truly honored and truly blessed to be here. So the question just now is whether this is a healthy democracy or is a dangerous fragmentation, right? For the record, Sabah state election, this current PRN 17, is the record high not just at state level, also at the federal level. We have 9 candidates contesting for 73 seats. And of course, in the eyes of the voters, more choices mean vibrant political scene, more choices means competition, and competition leads to better quality product, hopefully for better leadership. But at the same time, you have to also understand, if you have choices out there, like 14 contestants at one particular seat, it can make the voters to be overwhelmed with choices.
Absolutely.
Right, because you have 14 days of campaigning period, and they have now the psyche of the Sabahan voters is to look at the quality of the candidates. So they have to look at 14 candidates within 14 days. I think it's a bit overwhelmed. And later, I think if have this 14 contestants, you have low majority kind of winning, and they will cause fragmentation, of course.
Right. So on that point that you've just brought up, multi-cornered fights often split the votes, as you've just pointed out, and also it can create unpredictable outcomes. At the end of the day, Liana, who actually benefits from these sort of multi-cornered fights? Is it the voters or is it the political elites?
Never the voters for me. I think
Never the voters.
Never the voters. I mean, quite hard to get the benefit of all these multi-corners and very fragmented third contest, because it will be beneficial for the political elites or party which have more dominance, because it's normal in Sabah political landscape that they park Trojan horse candidate to split the votes, right? And the only parties or side that can have that kind of ability or resources would be political elites. And when they park there, it will hinder the progression or the chances of the newcomers and new parties to enter the ring and try to win.
So we speak of the elites, and when we look at the sort of landscape in Sabah as well, the issue of family linked and those who are in those short lists, this is also something that is a lot more visible in the state of Sabah compared to many other states. So how different is politics of family in Sabah, and how does that then contribute to what we're seeing today? And how will that as well influence where voters choose to place their votes?
Politik anak beranak kan?
Politik anak beranak.
Political dynasty.
We have to be brave enough to highlight that and call it out.
I think political dynasty is common, not just in Sabah. Sabah is quite glaring and prevalent because, for me, the surname used compared in Semenanjung, you have the surname of Kitingan, you have the surname of Aman. Because of the surname use, so people view it and deduce it as though it's coming from the family tree.
It carries a certain gravitas.
Correct. Yeah. And compared to Semenanjung or in Malaya, you do have that political dynasty politics. Right.
But what are we dealing with here in this 17th state election? Many are also weighing in to say that this is a test or critical test for the Prime Minister. And as well as we looked at the youth vote earlier, 54% is the core bloc of voters made out of youth. They want a sincere government, one that is engaging, one that looks and thrives on social justice and fairness as well. So what are the voters leaning towards from your observation this time around?
And I'd just like to add a point to that. Now, when we talk about Undi 18, the young people, a lot of times most of us would think that kids would want to be anti-establishment because they like the sound of anti-establishment. It's loud, it's vibrant, it brings adrenaline and energy to a somewhat mundane process of choosing the next head. Although it's an important process, it can be mundane, but these are things that drives it forward. Now, I guess we say that these young people will support anti-establishment. What are your thoughts on this? I think they're now better read. They have more information.
I think social media really helps in terms of getting the information and counter propaganda on the ground, counter emotional burden, political narrative. So I think what we have from the political analysts and pollster on the sentiment by the youngsters, what they want is autonomy, the candidate that is very close to them, understand their issues, bread and butter issues, job creation. I think that is more important to them now for PRN 17.
Well, joining us as well today is Dr. O San, Senior Fellow of the Singapore Institute of International Affairs. Dr. O, thanks for always weighing in when we come to these difficult topics. As a Sabahan yourself, Doctor, and a voter yourself today, what issues are most important to you in the state election, and what would you say are some key factors that will shape voter behaviour in this election? As we understand it as well, there is a call for reform. They want to see a more fresh energy being injected into the leadership, and of course some realistic long-lasting solutions.
Well, of course, I think the number one most important issue would be, as was mentioned just now by Syed, for example, namely infrastructural development. I think over the last few years, a lot of Sabahans have experienced a shortage of water, unstable electricity supply, shall we say, somewhat dented or rotten roads and difficulties in accessing the internet and so on, sometimes for submitting your work projects or your homeworks and so on. So I think for a lot of voters across age groups and certainly across communities, which political party or coalition could, in their mind, bring forth, shall we say, better infrastructural development. That is the number one concern. Closely related to that would be, of course, this so-called Sabah for Sabahan type of calling, namely, especially, of course, the reversion of 40% of revenues collected in Sabah to Sabah. And I think the main reason driving for that, it's of course in Sabah we need money for development. There is a little bit of shall we say nationalistic sentiments, but more it's of course we really do need a lot of funds, a lot of resources for better infrastructural developments. It still goes back to that infrastructural development, and of course the creation of
Right.
meaningful, gainful, more high quality jobs for especially the young people. Yeah.
I guess one of the more important questions here, and it's not in the list of questions given to me for you. Now, what we in the peninsula, what are we not getting about the elections in Sabah? Or what's one of the misconceptions we have about the elections in Sabah? Because everyone thinks we're there's a point where we talk about it a lot, like we know what's happening there. We don't live there, although we're all one nation. What are we missing the point on here with regards to the election in Sabah, and what would Sabahans want us to know?
Well, number one, of course, there's this, shall we say, oversimplification or sort of a fantasy about Sabah really being a very harmonious and multiracial society. Well, we are, but of course, when it gets to voting, as was mentioned just now, which clan you belong to and which particular community you belong to, that does carry some weight in many constituencies. But of course, a lot of these constituencies are indeed very mixed constituencies. So that's why you get sometimes this very fragmented political landscapes with, for example, a candidate who thinks he or she could command the votes from his or her particular community or particular groups and so on. They will present themselves as candidates, and that in the process, as was mentioned just now, of course, would split the votes. And then also, of course, again, this sort of what we take for granted in KL, for example. I live most of my time in KL nowadays, of course, namely infrastructure. That's very much lacking in Sabah. This morning, for example, to go out to vote, some of us will have to trudge through very muddy roads and so on. In KK, where I am, of course, that's much better. But as was mentioned by Syed, in the more interior constituencies, that's really a big issue. So who could better mobilize their supporters to come out to vote? I think that would also make a difference in this election.
Right.
Dr. Oba, I want to thank you for your time and all the best with what happens and how things unfold today during Sabah's big day out. We'll speak to you soon. Back to our studio in the guest. LIYANA, thanks for patiently waiting for us to come back to you as well. And we look at some of the lessons and trends of what we're seeing, what is shaping Sabah's landscape in terms of politics. What could be relevant for other states, or as Gerard pointed out earlier, for Malaysia as a whole? What could be something the rest of us can resonate with?
I think what is glaring and something that we can emulate now is the psyche of Sabahan voters now that they are choosing quality candidate over party. no longer blindly loyal to logo and label, but they want to see anyone that being appointed has to have merits and credibility and also track record. That's we have been, after Sheraton move, there's this mistrust or deficit of trust on politicians and politics, and now people don't believe party anymore, and people change their mind and say, I want to see which representative can present me the best and voice out my issues. I think that we can take up for the rest of Malaysia, especially in Semenanjung, candidate over party.
What we're picking out as well is that people are longing for a government that will listen and that will have long-term implementation plans that will be seen through end to end as well. With, of course, the youth there, is there this hope for a fresh slate rather than a leadership and a legacy leadership that will sort of have that hangover?
For me, I think it's divided. The sentiments. Some of the voters from the political analysis that have been conducted, some want continuity of what they have now, the good relationship with the unity government, and some want totally new government that can fight for their rights, especially for MA63 and also the 40% allocation for Sabah. So it's divided. But I can see that the unity government message is more acceptable, is more appealing to the voters, and we may see the result later.
Right.
This
So
afternoon,
we heard Ihsan weigh in earlier, and he talks a lot about infrastructural solutions. Now, the next person who sits up there needs to figure out a proper solution and a long-term plan for infrastructural development at a rapid pace. I think when you mirror this to what's happening in Sarawak, I think that's where the challenges set in with people wanting change quickly. And having said that, whilst people want to look for a leader who will represent them, let's flip the script a little bit and think about, all of us want what we want. At a certain point, there's only certain things a leader can do. Now, do the people on the ground, whether it's in the Peninsula, Sabah or Sarawak, understand the work of policymakers? I think that's also important. Whilst we're having all these conversations in silos, or whether on social media as a whole, do we understand, have our understanding of how politics works and how the governing of a state or country works moved up the ranks? And you've done a lot of talking on the ground, trying to get your thoughts on this.
For 60 years, our political scene is always based on partisan-based politics for me, and political literacy, policy literacy is very low among the electorates. So for me, the branding, the messaging and narrative by political parties is always, my party is better than yours because of race and religion. For example, Melayu terancam, Islam terancam. I'm for Kadazan Dasan Murut, Dusun Murut. I'm for Sulu Bajau and so on. It's always be identity politics. That is something I think we should work on with our voters, that politics is always about merits, delivery, and also, values rather than...
So does Sabah see that now, knowing full well that they have infrastructural problems or challenges that they need to deal with?
Yeah, I think that's the push now, rather than talking about identity politics. Now there's this necessity needs for us to have development, for us to push all these demands to our leaders. So that's why I think now the psyche of the Sabahans not really looking at label and logo, more on, what can you give to me, what you can deliver for the state and for us. And that's why I think the poll saying that the psyche of Sabah voters now changing towards picking the right candidate rather than picking the right party.
You brought up one of the main pain points or focus areas rather during this election, and that is the 40% entitlement under MA63. And every time there's a Sabah election, MA63 is a recurring theme, perhaps rightly so. Some politicians use it to pit East Malaysia against the West. Now, is MA63 just a political slogan, something to wave up in the air, or is it a sign or signal of real progress actually happening? And how is this being viewed by the people of Sabah? How significant will this be to help shape voter expectations?
In recent years, we have seen that the negotiation on MA63 has been successful between federal and state. They have more autonomy. They have courts recognition recently for the 40% allocation. And I think on merit, there's some progression. But of course, in political narrative, this MA63 can be carrot and can be a boogeyman for them to bait voters.
Right. Just before we close, how important will it be for PMX to lean in or weigh in and pull all this together? There's a certain point where it's PRN Sabah. It's a big thing for them, but it also has to be tied in nationally. And I think the Prime Minister is working on pulling all this together. What do you think he will be doing or thinking or needing to do moving forward?
I think it's a struggle for his party because the slogan now for PRN 17 is Sabah for Sabahan. It's very state-centric. And I think they give way for the local parties, their partners, for example, GERARD and Barisan Nasional, to take the center stage, to grab as many seats as possible, and to have the coalition unity government moving forward. But I think he did a good job in making sure that all parties in unity government can have a competitive environment here and still have cooperation at the federal level.
Right, so everyone can go there and fan out and do what you want to do.
But you cooperate with me at the federal level.
Fantastic.
Well, of dangling carrots and boogeymans and Trojan horses, there's a lot going on at the 17th Sabah state election. 37 seats to form the majority. We'll have to wait till the end of today to get those results. It's been touted, Gerard, as one of the most intense and unpredictable elections. But we'll need to take that short break from now on.
Right, so we'll need to do that. And stay with us right here on Bernama TV. A lot happening. Sharina will be in towards later in the evening to walk you through the results. That's going to be quite the evening, or quite the time,
highlight, really.
The highlight today.
But we'll be back at 3 p.m. If you'd like to join us again, LIYANA MARZUKI will return into the studio along with several other experts from Sabah as we unpack this important day, not just for Sabah state, but for the future of the state and the nation as well. In the meantime, if you'd like some latest updates and news on the state election, do visit prn.bernama.com. Keep it locked on to Bernama TV. Many more updates coming your way. We'll see you soon.